Number 1. Music box. This happened to me while I was in high school. I guess it was maybe a lot more creepy than scary, but it sure scared me. I was mildly popular in school. I wasn't going to win the homecoming or prom queen elections, but people knew who I was. And I like to think that I was more liked than disliked. I also had a few boyfriends, and that means I had exes too. But I really couldn't be sure whether what was going on was caused by an ex of mine, someone who was an admirer, or someone else altogether. The first thing that happened occurred after I was done rehearsing a play for the drama club. I had only a small part in the play, so I didn't have to stay as late as some of the other actors did. Still, it was fall, and it had already turned dark outside. I was the only one walking in the hallway as I approached my locker. As I did, I noticed something that bothered me a little bit. The dial of my combination lock was sitting on the last digit of my combination. I always spun it around after I closed my locker. I pulled on the handle, and the locker wasn't locked. I wondered if I had just forgotten about it before. But when I opened the locker, there's a very small wooden box sitting on the shelf. I opened it up, and it was a music box with a ballerina spinning, but the song was distorted. It was as if someone had opened the box and put the comb off by one space. It was playing the song, just off key. Now, although that was weird, it wasn't very scary. However, I was a bit bothered that someone knew the combination to my locker. I checked with all my friends, and they all told me that they hadn't put the music box in my locker. They also had no idea who had done it. The general consensus was that it was likely some sort of secret admirer that I had, or something like that. I felt it was odd though, mostly since the sound of the box was just a bit off. It didn't really seem like something a secret admirer would give you. For about a week, I just didn't think about it too much. It didn't happen again within that time frame. No one had approached me about it. My locker wasn't broken into a second time. I actually put it so far out of my mind that I didn't even request the school to change my locker or change the lock. However, a week afterward, it happened nearly exactly the same way. I was walking in the hallway after rehearsal and noticed that my combination dial was again situated where my lock was locked. This time, I was a little more hesitant to open the locker, but when I did, it was the same thing as before. There was a replica of the music box in my locker. It was just as distorted when I played it. At this point, I went to the principal and requested a different locker. I told him about how it had happened, and it happened a week beforehand, and it was all just creepy. Neither of us were thinking that anything could be dangerous, but it wasn't right that someone had access to my locker. I was moved immediately to a different locker, and I didn't have any more experiences like that. However, not long after, I was walking in the hallway, and I noticed someone at the locker. It was this guy I really didn't know. He was pretty weird and quiet, and I did have classes with him. He never participated though, so I mostly ignored him. I thought to myself it was odd that they found someone new for the locker so soon. And then it occurred to me, this guy would have already had a locker. Why would they have moved him into a new one? I began to think that maybe he had my locker the previous year, and that made me start wondering if he had been the one who had broken in and left the music boxes. It was creepy, but not something I was worried about. If he had access to the other locker, I knew there was no way he could get access to my new one, and he didn't seem dangerous or anything. That night, I was sitting at my desk studying. I looked up when I heard something at my window. I saw some movement, but couldn't make anything out of it. I got up. I walked slowly over to the window, and was shocked at what I saw. Another small replica of the music box was on my windowsill. This one was open, though. The ballerina was spinning around to the same warped music, but her head had been removed. And I knew the movement I had seen had to have been from the person who left it there, and I had no idea how long they had been looking at me before leaving the music box. My dad wanted to call the police, but my mom didn't think it mattered. I mean, there really wasn't anything they could do. However, we did go to the school and speak to the principal about what had happened. He confirmed that he would have a talk with any other students who may have previously had that locker. He told me he couldn't divulge who they were, though. I never found out who it was. And after receiving the beheaded ballerina music box, I didn't get another one. I was very nervous around that boy. His name was Colin. I found out. He never did anything, but he did stare at me a lot. But honestly, I had no more proof it was him than anybody else. I'm sorry if this isn't as scary as some stories, but it really did get scary to me. I mean, there's just something creepy about how all three music boxes played the same distorted song, and I knew that beheaded ballerina was not a mistake. Number 2. The hike. I think the thing that I like most about the fall is when the leaves are falling. I think ground cover is nice, but I really like watching them fall. I'm sure you know what I mean when I mention that one day that seems to happen every autumn, when you wake up and the leaves are just falling like rain. Yeah, I always greatly enjoy that. When this happened, I was a teenager. Though I currently live in the city, I lived in the country when this happened. There were tons of forests surrounding the hills that surrounded our home. We lived on one of those hills. And like what seems to happen in a lot of these scary stories, I loved to go out and explore the surrounding area. Since school was back in when autumn hit, I had never before had a chance to go on a hike when the leaves were heavily falling from the trees. But one day, I woke up on the weekend. Looking out my bedroom window, I noticed it. It was that day, and I was not going to be in school. It was pretty cool outside, so I put on my favorite suede jacket, put some food in a backpack, tied up my hiking boots, and set out to do some hiking. I remember the area that I decided to hike in. It was a nice area that I knew didn't have any electric fences or anything like that. Now, I had been in that area several times before in the past. There was nothing really unusual out there. There were no strange animals, no broken down sheds or barns or anything like that. It was just nature, and it was a beautiful backdrop to the cascade of leaves falling all around me. There were so many leaves falling as well, due to the many, many trees. It was almost like being in a really bad snowstorm. I couldn't really see so far in front of me after a while. Suddenly, I heard the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. I froze. I was gripped by fear, but not because I thought that there was some kind of foul play going on. My first thought was that it was simply a hunter out hunting. But even that idea was a bit scary for several reasons. The main reason being that with the limited visibility due to the falling leaves, there would be a good chance that I could get accidentally shot. Immediately after I had that thought, another one occurred to me. I wondered why someone would even be out hunting on a day where you can barely see anything. The thoughts all occurred to me rather instantly. Then I heard a second gunshot, and I heard a terrible yelling sound. It was human, and it was angry but not pained. I wasn't able to make out exactly what was said, but it was definitely a person yelling at someone or something, and it was displeased. Again, I don't really know what was going on. I was frightened, because there was absolutely the possibility that someone had gotten shot. And even if there wasn't, I was out in a rainfall of leaves far out in the forest with an angry-sounding guy who had a gun, and he had shot something twice. I tried to make my way back toward my house, but it was scary trying to do so. Every moment was nerve-wracking. It was hard to see where I was going, and it was hard to know if anyone else was around. There were also a lot of noises, in addition to my own feet crunching leaves underneath. By the time I made it home, through the entire walk, I was a nervous wreck. but I was able to get home without incident. I heard later that indeed, someone had been murdered out in the woods that day. A man was shot twice in the chest. The shooter claimed he did it because he owned the property that I was hiking on, and the person he killed was trespassing. Fortunately, that defense didn't work, and the man went to jail. I don't know. I think that defense is pretty scary. I mean, I was on that property, and if he was willing to kill someone else for being on it, he would have been willing to kill me. That is much more frightening to me than the idea that one man was killed due to premeditated murder. Number 3. The Fall. I don't know if this story is going to really scare anyone, but I guarantee at the very least that several people all will have a hard time hearing it. Hell, it had been quite a long time since it had happened, and I still wince every single time I think about it. Growing up, my dad owned a lot of property in a rural area. The people were rather contentious in that area too. Although the majority of the land was just hills and trees, the people really enjoyed fighting each other over what amount of land really belonged to whom. For the most part, I didn't have any involvement in that. What I did know about was that people often got into my father's land, and they would be doing some illegal hunting. My dad was very annoyed by that, so he decided that he was going to completely surround his property with barbed wire fences. Another thing about my dad was also that he did tend to procrastinate. So even after he had all the barbed wire, he put it out in his barn. Well, it wasn't really a barn, as much as it was a cross between a barn and a shed. There were never any animals out there or anything. There was no hay or anything like that, but there were a lot of tools. My dad was pretty big on tools. And now, there was a lot of wooden poles and a lot of barbed wire. When I was 16, my family went out on a visit to a corn maze. Personally, I never liked that sort of thing, so I decided to stay home. Hell, I was a 16-year-old boy. So one of the things I loved, more than anything else, was the time that I was able to spend home by myself. It was quite a drive, and I knew I would be home by myself for a long time. Well, I also had an ulterior motive as well. Although I didn't get into things like corn mazes, I did decide I wanted to go to a Halloween party later in the month, and I felt that if my dad was gone, I would be able to snag a little bit of the barbed wire. I could dull the barbs, I reasoned, or something to keep it from hurting me or others. My costume idea was to wrap certain parts of me in the dulled barbed wire. Then, all I needed was some fake blood, some fake makeup wounds, and I would have one of the coolest costumes at the entire party. And I was looking to win a prize, too. I went out into the barn shed in order to get what I needed. There was so much barbed wire there that I was sure that me taking a little bit wouldn't adversely affect my father's fencing project. But yeah, there was a big bed of barbed wire. I figured there had to be some way for me to dull the barbs, and I was looking for a tool to do that. I didn't really have a plan, and even now, years later, I can't think off the top of my head if there even is really a way to dull the barbs and barbed wire. While I was distracted trying to look for a tool, I grabbed a pair of bolt cutters to cut off a few lengths of wire. When I walked over to the bed of wire, I accidentally hit my foot into the leg of a workbench, and then I slipped and I fell. And yeah, I'm sure you've guessed it by now. I fell right onto the bed of barbed wire. I cannot even explain the pain. Many barbs pierced into my body in all different places. But worse was the panic, which did cause me to flail around a little bit, only making it worse. Finally, I realized I needed to try and calm down so I could get myself off the bed of barbed wire. Try to imagine this if you can. I was laying on top of a bed of barbed wire. I needed my hands to try and push myself up, but I couldn't reach anything beyond the bed of barbed wire. One of my hands was mildly free, so I was able to use it to free my other hand. Still, I wasn't able to use my hands to push up. The way I was laying, however, only pelvis on up was on the bed. My knees were firmly on the ground. So I did something that is probably going to make everyone shiver. I pressed down pretty hard with my knees and used that leverage to raise myself up. It was hard, and my knees were probably hurting, where the knee pain was nothing compared to all the pain of the barbs being pulled out of my body. It was agonizing, but after a period of time, I was able to get myself completely off the bed of barbed wire. There was blood everywhere, and I was in agony. However, I needed an ambulance, so I managed to get into the house and called one. They left a note for my parents, since I had no way to contact them. I won't get into too many more details, other than to tell you that I had a lot of scars, and a few in some very interesting places. Needless to mention, I did not ever make that Halloween costume. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. As I mentioned in my community post, the main reason I haven't had a video out in the past week is I've been working very hard on Dracula. There's a lot going into it, and I'm thinking it will be great when it finally comes out. Well, October is here, so if you have any good Halloween stories, please send them to me. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to click the subscribe button below and the bell, or click the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment, and share the video with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please email it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, don't forget to make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where a Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.